Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing friends at Skillshare. On their behalf, I hope you enjoy.
There's a famous formula, which I'm sure you heard of, E plus R equals O, where E is the event, something happens to you, R is your reaction, and O is the outcome. And the only thing that matters is your reaction to whatever comes up. Because you know in life, in business, stuff's going to come up at some point. You just don't know what it is. And it's all about your reaction, how you deal with that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Impact Theory. Our goal with this show and company is to introduce you to the people and ideas that will help you actually execute on your dreams. All right, today's guest is a successful entrepreneur, adventurer, and serial disruptor who grew up in a tiny fishing village in England that had a total population of 35 people. Despite that, he started his first business when he was just 14, and by the time he was 16, he was exporting a half-ton of crab to Spain per week. Since then, he's founded several other successful companies, including one that he sold for a seven-figure sum while sailing on a yacht in the Pacific Ocean. But he wasn't sipping martinis and playing shuffleboard. He was in the middle of a beautiful, albeit brutal journey that would test his courage, leadership, and resilience. After years of struggling to save a failing business and working on a marriage that was lukewarm at best, he realized that he needed to radically change his life. So he let go of his ego, set about building a business that could thrive without him, and then set sail on a seemingly impossible trip, sailing around the world with his wife and three children ages 9, 7, and 2. They would ultimately be at sea for 2 years, circumnavigating the entire globe 1.5 times while being crammed into their small boat with limited supplies. But not only did they complete the voyage successfully, the experience was entirely transformative and laid bare for him the fundamental truths of effective leadership. Since returning, these insights have made him one of the most sought-after speakers on the subject of teamwork and leadership, and he is regularly featured in the most prestigious media outlets in the world, including the Wall Street Journal, BBC, the New York Post, and CNN. So please, help me in welcoming the man who stitched a gash in his daughter's forehead with a strand of her own hair while in the middle of a stormy ocean. The author of Where the Magic Happens, Caspar Craven.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Well, welcome.
What an introduction. Thank you.
Dude, what an amazing response to not being satisfied with your life and to feeling that you could do more. I mean, that's really extraordinary. And that's the thing that blew me away with the book, with the speaking that you do, is where this all started. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about intention.
Okay, so the whole thing that I wrap this up in these days is all about the philosophy and how you think about life. And it was 2009, and my wife and I, you alluded to in the bit at the top there, our marriage wasn't in the greatest shape. And, we'd have arguments about money, not spending enough time together with the children, all those sorts of things. And we were kind of asking ourselves the question, is this all there is to life? And to the outside world, it probably looked okay. We had sort of young family, lived outside London, and running my own business. But the inside story was very, very different. It was difficult and it was painful. And it all changed. It was the 13th of June 2009 when it was actually my brother-in-law suggested or told us about this family who sailed around the world, and then went on to say what a ridiculous, crazy idea that was, which it was. And then my wife and I, that was the seed that caught our imagination. And we said, why don't we go and do something radically different with our lives? And the idea was crazy back then because we didn't have the money. My wife, she'd been on a boat twice, and she'd been seasick both times at that point. And we didn't have a boat either. So there were lots of good reasons why we shouldn't have done it. But it was all about sort of saying, let's do something radically different with our lives. And I guess the whole thing started with the intentionality of sitting down with my wife, and we spent a lot of time listening to each other and saying, what's really important to you? And we created these two different lists. So I visualized it like, here's all the things that was important to me, and here are all the things that are important to my wife. And we just found where there were things that crossed over. We had an intersection, which is my thumbs here. The rest of it we dropped. And we just focused on those few things that we had in common. And then we just created a different narrative of the future, which was all around only those things that we shared in common. And that was kind of that was where it sort of really started to come to life, because when you talk about things that excite both of you, then that creates energy. Whereas before I've been saying I want to do this, and Nicola was saying so you want to do this, and you just end up clashing. So it all came with creating a different story of the future, basically.
One thing that I find so amazing in that is getting out of the energy of bickering and fighting and worrying about money and all that. I know the vibe that creates, and I know the way that it makes you come at each other. How'd you guys conceptualize maybe in the beginning just we need to think about this a fundamentally different way, and instead of talking about all the things that we disagree on, start talking about that area.
About that piece there. So what we would do is, it gets to the weekend, we wait until the kids had gone to bed, they were aged 2 and 4 then, and we just ask ourselves the question, what's really important to us in life? And when we started to free flow and let those questions come out, and I would ask Nicola, and I'd say, tell me everything that's really important to you. And I would write down everything that she said, and then I'd say, this is what I heard. That process in itself, we call that deep listening. I think that's a really, really rare thing, that people really sit down and understand what's important to your partner. That, for me, was the first part that started to change our direction, by really listening to what was going on. So I think that's where it started, with the listening piece.
Deep listening, that's really strong. It actually makes me want to like go do that with my wife immediately. Like that's and I feel like I know my wife, but we've actually never done that where it's like I write it down and then say back, this is what I think I understand. Now, so was this all stuff that was coming from what you were learning about team building and work, and you were bringing those strategies into the house?
So at this stage, the business was still struggling. And we thought, well, let's create an exciting narrative for us and what we want for our future. Because the previous model of the world that I'd had been build a business up, sell it, get some money, and then go off and have family time. But in our mid-30s, that wasn't working, and I hadn't figured out the secret to really grow a successful business at that stage. So we kind of came at it from a different angle and said, okay, well, I'm about to lose my marriage unless we sort something out here, so let's pay attention to that. And that just happened to be the key that unlocked it. And that whole philosophy of putting family first and then creating the businesses which would support that. So the whole business journey is another one where I almost broke my business, but I'm sure we'll come on to that. But it's that piece of the deep listening, that was really the core of it.
And what were things that you were learning, and were the things you were learning getting you excited because you could see a shared area of energy where, like, I know we'll create a really cool vibe here if we start getting amped up about that?
So going back to when we had that, there were literally only 3 things that we shared in common. We wanted to go and see the elephants in Africa, we wanted to go diving on the Great Barrier Reef, and we wanted to go to Carnival in Brazil. That was it. There wasn't a huge amount to go on, right? It was 3 holidays. So basically, we created the narrative around that, and we just played with what that might look like. And it was Nicola who actually said, well, why don't we get a boat and go and sort of join the dots up by sailing around the world? And that was kind of how it started to come together. But we then we got a piece of paper. It was the headed note paper from my old business. And we literally wrote out a mission statement, which started on the 1st of August 2014. We're setting sail as a happy, contented family, having achieved so much money, and this is how we're going to do it. And also, this is what we're going to do afterwards, because this can't just be a one-time only thing. This has to be the narrative for how your life is going to continue into the future. And we set a date, so the 1st of August 2014, that date was literally locked in stone. And when we told everybody that this is what we're going to do, then of course everybody laughed and said we were crazy and told us all those reasons that we couldn't do it.
That's crazy. And so I've read the letter, which is you actually put a photo of in your book, which I thought was really cool to see it in your handwriting, to see you guys adjusting words and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You see the grits crossed out afterwards.
Which was really cool. I loved that. And knowing that you guys hung it up and it was there for so long. But what I love is the tense that it was written in. It was like you had already done it.
Yes.
And so that was really interesting to me, that you would choose that to do. We have left and we have made the money and established the connection as a couple, and I thought that was really pretty powerful, especially if you're looking at it every day.
Well, it's interesting. So one of the influences I had back then was a book, Psycho-Cybernetics, by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And there's the whole process he describes in there, the theatre of your mind. And literally every day for the 5 years after we created that, I would come downstairs 5:30 in the morning, and I would sit down and I'd do 5-10 minutes seeing everything in the theatre of my mind. And I would see us buying the boat. I would see us sailing down the English Channel, sailing into the Canary Islands. I'd see the flags fluttering, all the little the detailed bits and pieces. So yeah, that was an important part too.
Yeah, that's really powerful. One thing I found so interesting in your story is that you guys had a lot of naysayers, but the way you respond to them was not what I expected. How'd you guys handle naysayers?
So it's interesting, right? So someone gives you criticism, right? And they come at you like this. The first reaction is to push back. And my experience, when you do that, you just end up with an argument and nobody wins, and that's not particularly helpful. So it was helpful, by the way, in the process I'm about to describe, that it wasn't just me, it was me and my wife together. The whole thing, we talk about we rather than me. So when people told us all the reasons that we couldn't do it, that sometimes those reasons come across so powerfully, they sound like facts, but they're just opinions. And it's really important to remember that distinction, that they are only opinions. But whenever someone told us things like that, we didn't dismiss it out of hand, we'd write it down. And then we put that piece of paper to one side. And that list that got bigger and bigger over time, of course. But because we'd spent that first 6 months talking about the vision of where we were going to go, and also the purpose of why we were doing it, which was to create magical, life-changing experiences for us and our children. We spent a lot of time talking about that purpose, actually. That we got so clear on that became this unstoppable momentum, that when we then came back to all those reasons why not, then we could start to work our way through those methodically. And it's interesting because we have a saying in our family that if it was down to me, nothing would ever get finished. If it was down to my wife, nothing would ever get started. So we kind of work quite well together as a team. And we'd literally take each of those different areas. And so, for example, one of the areas was medical. And we think, okay, well, how are we going to deal with this if something happens on the boat, which you mentioned before, it did. And we had to figure out a way to get comfortable with that. So we both trained to become ship's doctors, do the most intense medical training you can do outside of becoming a nurse or a doctor. And then we always made sure we knew where there were other doctors and other medical resources that we can go and draw on. So rather than being overwhelmed by this whole list of reasons we can't do it, then we just literally worked our way through them one by one, or rather my wife took control of doing that and figured out all the detail to it. So it's a real team thing.
Talk to me about your concept of relentless action. That was something that I found really powerful, because the criticisms, like you were saying, were coming. You like to choose to believe that they were coming from a place of care, and which I think is really smart. And so, hey, they're just worried. They want to voice all the things that they think maybe we aren't thinking about. But they had a pretty damn good list of reasons why you shouldn't. Like, you even listed them yourself. But one that I've never heard you talk about, but was the one that jumped out at me on your board, was pirates. And I thought, oh God, like there's a lot of legitimate stuff to be freaked out about. And like, how do you go in and put your plan of attack together to deal with those things? And to use relentless action to find solutions to all this.
Yeah, I mean, the relentless action for me comes from the fact that that whole thing, you know where you're going, you know why you're going, and you are locked into that. And it's that whole thing. You try something, if that doesn't work, you try something else. If that doesn't work, you try something else. But for me, when you make a decision and you say that is going to happen, come hell or high water, you're going to find a way. And you always say, if there's something you want, you're either going to find a way or you're going to find an excuse. Those are the only two options, right? So the relentless action piece is, that going until you find it. And the filter that I ran in my mind, that people are just caring about us, and it just sometimes comes out in a funny way, that just made it easier to deal with and think about all those different issues.
And the one that I think would be a great excuse for most people is that you guys didn't have the money. And so it's the story, there's so many interesting pieces in it, that you're a successful entrepreneur, that you're a disruptor, and that you've been active as an entrepreneur since you're 14, and you hear all the success, but once you realize that the timing was, you guys put a 5-year ticking clock.
Correct. Yeah.
You said we have done this as of this date, and it was a lot of money. to get the boat. So how do you, like when the business isn't working and all that, I'd love to hear some of the mechanism of what you did to the business to actually achieve that, because it's pretty extraordinary once you have that driving force that you actually pulled it off.
It was late in 2011. And I was feeling the pressure now, because before it was, it was 5 years away, and now it's 3 years away. Oh, that's suddenly getting closer, right? And it's like, okay, so I've got to do something different. So my mind was now starting to look out for different things that I could do. And I came across a guy from the States, Dan Kennedy, and I started going to his seminars and events. And I went to one at the end of 2011. And I literally had sort of light bulb moments going off all inside my head. And so I went back into my business at the beginning of 2012, and I started implementing like crazy. I hired new staff, we launched new products. I was doing all these different marketing campaigns, videos, paper copy, newsletters. And literally, I was charging through the business like a man possessed, because I had 3 years to get everything ready. And we got to the end of Q1, and my business partner, his name's Ed, took me to one side and he said, Caspar, if you carry on doing what you're doing, every single person in the business, including me, is going to leave, because you are driving us crazy and you're forcing these ideas on us, and it's all utterly ego-driven. And, slap in the face. It's like, okay, so there's this thing that I really, really want to make happen. Now only 2.5 years away, and I realized that I've got to have a different approach. So I found this lady called Margaret. She became my savior, and she was a leadership training expert. And we did all this stuff, drawing pictures and figuring out, what was my leadership style and how could I engage the rest of my team in the business. And I started to have some light bulb moments going off at that point about how do you truly build a team to make something happen. And taking my ego out of it was one part of it. Another part was getting really clear on the vision, where we're going to, the purpose, why do people care, a values-based approach. That was a huge part of what we did, both in the business, and then we'd apply that in the family as well. And then just finding brilliant people and building on their strengths and letting them do what they're amazing at. And this is stuff that you know and lots of other people know out there. But it was sort of kind of stuff that I knew, but I wasn't doing it. So we literally started to put that in place in the business. We did a lot of work on our values, and we agreed on our values as a team, and we started to find ways to bring that into the business day to day. And literally that was the turning point for the business starting to take off. And I think in the 12 months that followed that, we grew at the fastest rate we'd ever grown before. We made more profit than the previous 6 years combined. And literally the business was just starting to take off. But it was all just from that mindset shift of, rather than saying it's about me, it's about we, and how do we engage everybody in the team to go and do that.
Dude, I love that. That concept has been transformative for me as well as an entrepreneur. Give us some detail about the being a values-driven organization or family, what that means, like what's that process?
Okay, we got creative, and we got magazines out, and we got nice food and drinks in, and we started to say, what values are the things that we want to feel proud of how we show up in our business. And literally, we only had a small team of 10, 12 people, and we engaged everybody in that debate around what are these values. And then we distilled it down to a shorter list, and then it came down to 6 values. We created a picture to symbolize all the values. So it's a picture of a lion. So courage was one of the core values. But we also spent a lot of time saying, what is it that we do when we demonstrate this value at its very best? Because if I say the word courage and I ask 10 different people what that means, I'll get 10 different answers. So it's creating that shared understanding. So that was the first piece. Then the next piece was making sure that lived inside the business, which very simply, I get all the team together, we do a weekly scrum on a Monday morning, we talk about our priorities. And then I would just call out 2 people, and I'd talk about specific actions that I'd seen someone do. And I give out bars of chocolate, candy bars. And then I got other people in the business to start to spot and hand out the values prizes. So I'm training people to look for what's right. Because that whole thing, our brains are hardwired and trained to look for what's wrong. And in terms of growing people, I don't think that really helps. It's that whole thing about building on people's strengths. So the values framework provided us that conversation around building on people's strengths. And what was fascinating, so that was a key part in transforming the business. There's a famous formula, which I'm sure you heard of, E plus R equals O, where E is the event, something happens to you, R is your reaction, and O is the outcome. And the only thing that matters is your reaction to whatever comes up. Because you know, in life, in business, stuff's going to come up at some point. You just don't know what it is. And it's all about your reaction, how you deal with that. So,
yeah, that's an amazingly powerful math equation, and really makes me think about your marriage. And this, I think, this was so beautiful to me in your story, because, okay, the event is sort of like life isn't as fun as I thought it would be, which is like that insidious, it's so, like you described it perfectly. You said it's like 60 degrees. It's not overly warm. It's not too cold. So you just sort of settle in there. And the insidious nature of how quietly that can just take over your life. So that's the event, right? Now, most people's reaction to that is essentially nothing, to just lay helplessly in the frustration. But your guys' reaction wasn't divorce, it wasn't to scream and yell, it was to go, hey, we want something better, and to build this shared vision. What was it about coming together on a boat in difficult situations? Like, you guys knew what you were in for. You've done this before by yourself or with a team, but not your family. So you know what's coming. You know it's gonna be hard. It's a little bit like a foxhole life. But I see the images you guys took where your wife looks giddy as you guys are planning everything. And she gets seasick. So like, I can feel the two of you knowing that there's gonna be something about the proximity or something that is gonna help us with these issues. So what was it? Like, why was that such a beautiful, magical time when it sounds just kind of dangerous and cramped and lonely?
what a great question. The essence of that for me was the whole thing about truly working together as a team and appreciating the strengths each person brings to it. And I joked before about, it was down to me, nothing would ever get finished, down to Nicola, nothing would ever get started. And it brought that deep appreciation of each other, but also being on a boat as well. There's that reliance on each other, that deep reliance. And, it's that whole thing that, when you're facing adversity, that does bring you closer together. And I'm glad you mentioned the bit about the 60 degrees, because that's, I think, where we were before. And we did all the screaming and shouting and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't do any good because nobody's listening and nobody cares, right? So you come back to it, it's like, well, okay, if I want something different for my life, if I want more for my life, then I've got to take control of this together. And I think, one of the sentences my wife always says is that most people end up living 1 centimetre away from their own faces, and you're just caught up in the here and now, and you don't take that time to imagine and dream and create a more exciting story. I mean, literally, that story was the thing that just pulled us out there into the future. That was the essence of it.
Dude, that's a pretty rad R. Like, that is a great way to react to this scenario. And for me, was the part that was the intoxicant that pulled me into your world. And hearing you talk about one day, you said I've had countless conversations with people where the answer is one day.
Yeah.
What is that conversation?
So the whole thing, you meet so many people, one day I will go and do this, one day I will go and get that beach bar in the Caribbean, one day I will get fit, whatever it is. And it reminds me of when I was building my business before. I'm building a business and in 5 years' time I'll sell it. But no matter how close I got to it, it was always still 5 years away. And so the essence of that is putting that date in the diary and making that firm decision. That is going to happen. And there's no two ways about it. So that was literally the thing that changed it all. So
talk to me about clarity. Like, how important is clarity? Do you encounter that? I know you do workshops and stuff. Do you encounter that a lot with the people that come to you, that they just don't really know what they want?
Yes, that's a huge thing. And I was talking about when we came up with that vision, we didn't just sit down one weekend and there we go, we created the piece of paper. It took us 6 months to create that. And a large part of that is you ask yourself the question and your conscious mind will throw out half a dozen things. But what I'm really interested in is the stuff that comes out of your subconscious mind, the stuff that's been buried over time. Because that whole thing, you ask people, what's happiness to you, or what do you really want to do? People say, well, I don't know. And so it's investing the time to go deep into that process and understand what it is and uncover those things, not just for you, but for your partner as well. So it's just finding a different thing and challenging the norm and just sort of finding your own path.
Oh, that's really incredible. So you've really become known for your ability to build strong teams and leadership. And I know you give a whole talk about the 8 cornerstones of leadership. What are they? How can people really build that into their own lives?
Okay, so I always think that the things that will make you thrive in business are exactly the same things that will make you thrive in a family. But it's having a really clear vision of where you're going to. It's knowing why that's so important to you and the reason why when you get knocked down, when everything fails, when my business partner, everybody threatened to walk out, it's like I've got a really strong reason to make this work. So I'm going to get back up together and make it work together. The whole piece about relentless action, and you go until you sort of find the way. There's a lot in there as well about not waiting for perfect. You mentioned why people don't often do things. I think that's a big one, because I think this whole concept of perfection for me is such a dangerous concept, because people wait until everything is perfect before they can move forwards. So when we left the UK, our boat was not perfect. We only bought it 10 weeks before we left, and that was a short period of time. And when we did slip lines and leave Southampton, one of the toilets wasn't working, and there were a few problems with the boats. But we asked ourselves 2 questions. 1, have we got a good, safe boat and all the fundamental things work? Yes. 2, do we trust ourselves that we'll be able to figure out the answer to whatever it is that comes up? And we could answer yes to both those questions. So it's like, right, that's it, we're going to get going. I've got friends who've got boats who are going to go sailing around the world at the same time as we were. They're still in England. They haven't left because they are waiting for perfect. It doesn't exist. Another one is a happy team is a fast team. You get people in roles that they love doing, where they're thriving, where they feel fulfilled, then you'll go fast. That was what we did in the business, and that was what we did on the boat as well. So that's a really important one about getting people in the right roles. Emotional resilience is another one about the living your values and how do you deal with stuff when it comes up. And also a massively overlooked one. Everyone talks about this, but the whole power of celebration. And whenever we had small victories, we would celebrate those, because small victories lead to big victories. So it's just creating that winning habit. So those are pretty much the lessons that I share with people, both in families and business, same principles.
That's really strong. So as you're building out these teams and you're getting people moving and you're realizing that there's a level of happiness that is bringing everybody together, going back to the business world, how do you begin to scale that? How do you take that culture and pass it on so that you can leave?
Yeah, I asked myself the question, how can I create a business that can run without me? And that question led me to the path of, again, taking my ego out of it, but making myself redundant from the business. And I always think that's relatively easy to find people who are better than I am in every single role that I can go into. So I'm very humble about that. There are some very, very talented people out there. And it's just finding people better than me. And my piece, I guess, was helping to set that fabric of the culture, of the direction, of the purpose, and getting people to do that. Because those are the perfect teams, right?
You talked about essentially getting out from under your own ego, that your ego was holding you back, that the running the company was coming from that place. How did you get out from under it? How did you still get pride in yourself? What was it like to navigate that?
Great question as well. The first point of how I got out of my own ego was the rational thought that if I didn't, we weren't going to be getting on the boat. So it's that whole thing, have you got enough leverage on yourself to be able to make a difference?
So talking about leverage, I think that's really interesting, and I really hope people at home are listening, because this to me is the difference between people that go on to do the things that they want and the people that go on to one more, or one day.
Mm-hmm.
How did you create that leverage? Because you didn't start with it. So how did you turn that? I know you're a fan of Tony Robbins, so I'll use his language. How did you turn that want into a need?
I mean, it all just comes back to that fundamental thing that this has to happen. And the thing that's standing in the way is me. Dan Kennedy used to have a great saying, which is, you've got to get out of your own way. And that whole thing with, turning that want into the need, that needs to happen. Otherwise, the whole thing is it's not going to work otherwise.
And was part of it sitting down? So I'm imagining it. You've got the thing. You guys actually put it up on your wall. The mission statement is shared. You can feel that like my marriage is actually getting better. We're connected. We're excited. We've changed the energy of the way that we talk. And so, was there anything that was like, I just want to keep doing this, like the process, the planning, and that in emotionally investing in that, did it begin to escalate in your mind in importance?
So what was interesting, I mean, through that whole process of consistently doing that, I mean, there were times when it was tough and you didn't feel like doing it. And I kind of painted the picture as like, 5 years and it was all plain sailing. But, we had our sort of, moments of ups and downs. And it's funny, we ran a workshop a few weeks ago, and we brought out, for the people, we actually ran at our home, and we brought out this map of the world. And someone said, why is that map all sort of crunched up? And I was like, I had to confess that I remember getting to a point of like extreme frustration, and like nothing was working. It's like, ah! But then like 3 hours later, it's like, okay, tape it back up together and put it back up on the wall. And okay, we're carrying on again. So, they were definitely sort of, more challenging points in the journey, and you've got to put it back together.
I love that. I think that's really useful for people to understand, like, because the relentless action, which is definitely my favorite phrase that you have, relentless action doesn't mean that it isn't going to get frustrating and hard, and sometimes where you're like, I don't see a way out. Do you have a process for when I don't see a way out, how do you keep moving?
The thing that I've learned, whenever I get to a point where I don't know the answer, I feel the frustration building up in me, map coming down off the wall, that sort of stuff. I now know that's a trigger. I've got to go and learn something.
That's interesting.
So I've got to go out and find the very smartest person that I can to help me get through whatever it is that I'm facing. Because I know whatever I'm looking at, someone will have faced that before.
You've talked about what you call breakthrough thinking. Mm-hmm. What is breakthrough thinking? How can I build that into my life?
So for me, it's the philosophical shift when you say, I don't know the answers to this. I've got to go and find someone who is doing something that's radically different to me, and then I've got to change the way that I look at this. So I guess my favorite example of this is this whole thing of family first. That was our first piece of breakthrough thinking, because before it had always been business first, make money, then go and do family stuff. And it was literally turning life on its head and saying family first. So for me, that's an example of breakthrough thinking. It just approaching stuff in a different way. Another one would be that whole thing of the criticism, rather than responding to it and like being like this. It's like, okay, let's just sit back for this moment and think about this. How do we take a different approach to it?
No, that makes a ton of sense. So I'm going to ask the question that I would have been curious to know had I met you as you were about to embark on this. And I think is what made me like this story so much is I don't have a good answer to this. How did you face that this is dangerous and you're going to take a 2-year-old out into the ocean? Like that's one of those that like you hear about somebody else doing it and your stomach drops. Was that just a non-issue for you because you've sailed so much, you know that it's all, they're hard waters, but they're navigable ultimately? Or was it like some things are just important enough to take risks?
So it's definitely not the last one. So it's interesting. So when people hear the story, there's the first reaction is usually, you must be utterly insane to take a 2-year-old on a boat around the world. I get it. So we took nothing lightly at all. And our approach was this huge level of rigorous planning, thinking through every single risk and how do we mitigate that. So for the last, 18 months or so before we left, whenever you saw my wife, Nicola, underneath her arm would be this huge folder, and there'd be detailed spreadsheets, literally going through every single thing we could think of. So the medical training is one example, the homeschooling was another example. And not only that, we went and found communities of sailors who had done similar things before, and we went and said, how did you manage these risks? What did you do?
Learning seems to be a big part of the adventure, and I was wondering if, so I was really, really hardcore about learning Greek for a while because my wife and I had planned to have kids at the time, and so I really wanted, because she speaks Greek fluently, so I wanted to be able to speak Greek fluently so we could teach it to our kids.
Yeah.
And she just this weekend was lamenting that we weren't practicing Greek anymore. But the punchline was she wasn't really bothered to do it anymore because it no longer had like that driving purpose. And was that part of, and I asked this question because I think there are people out there listening right now, they're one dayers, right? Like one day. And if they understood how many little things in this, that it would affect their life and for the better, was there something to having that driving purpose that gave learning like such intensity that the learning itself became fun and addictive and you really leaned into it?
Totally. I mean, So again, the driving force, date in the diary, that's the vision, that's the purpose, that's why we're going to go and do it. We did get addicted on learning. What was interesting as well is the whole side of homeschooling as well on the boats. So when we left, we had the boat loaded up with all the curriculum books from the schools. And I remember about 3 months in, as we're sailing down the European coast, and I'm sitting there with my son, called Columbus, and trying to teach him about the kings and queens of England. And I come down after an hour, and there's this sort of glaring sheet of blank paper, and the pen has not moved, and he's not even remotely interested in anything going on with kings and queens of England. So I said to him, it's like, what are you interested in? So he said, I'm really interested in fishing. So I said, okay. So we then got all the fishing books out, and he started reading about all the different fish in the different oceans and how to catch them and so on. So now his reading is starting to move forward at a good speed. We then start catching fish. So we're catching these great big yellowfin tuna and mahi-mahis. So now we start to dissect them. So we're learning biology. He's now writing in his journal, and he's weighing them, he's measuring them, and drawing these beautiful pictures saying where we caught it. And then it led him to setting up a business, making and selling fishing lures and advice sheets. So we get to an anchorage, and he's going around in the dinghy, going around to all the other boats and said, do you want to buy fishing lures? So what was fascinating is we just took something that he was really passionate about, and we just went deep into that. And that led him to literally every single subject, to literacy, to numeracy, to business, to science. So that whole approach to learning and finding those things, they always say, that set your soul on fire, that excite you, that make you curious and want to learn more, find those things. And I think, there's fundamental issues with our current education system. And I think, the skills that our children of the future need are very different to the ones we've had in the past. And I think part of the secret is finding what each person is passionate about, because they'll learn. Columbus' learning rate literally went through the roof when we did that. So that whole learning thing is really, really core to us.
Yeah, that's super cool. So in the book, you do like call outs, skipper's learnings, lessons. What are some of the like really key lessons that have been transformative for you, for your family?
I think the whole thing about the we, not me, is been a really key one. Learning to appreciate the strengths of the people around you and getting them to do what they are brilliant at doing. I love the whole thing about, there's one or two things we're extraordinary at, and oftentimes you don't realize what they are because you do them so innately. So it's being more of what you are really good at. So it's getting in your own zone and doing the things that ignite you. So I think that's probably a big one. And I think, the other thing is, that shared narrative, that shared story, that's literally where it starts, creating an exciting story of the future. That's the big one.
Love that. All right, before I ask my last question, where can these guys find you online?
Okay, so my name's Caspar Craven. There's only one of me out there. So CasparCraven.com, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those things. So
Nice,
yeah.
And it's a superhero name, so I love that. My last question, what is the impact that you want to have on the world?
Okay, so the impact that I would love to give both practical advice and inspiration to millions of people all over the world to grab hold of life and say, what's really important to me and my family, create that exciting story, and then reverse engineer your life to meet your family goals. Nobody ever gets to the end of the days and says, I wish I'd done this. It's always all about family. Put family first, work together as a team, and be brave, step outside your comfort zone, and go and make that family story happen. So that's my personal mission. And every week I get these amazing messages from people saying that the impact our story has had on them. And I've become utterly addicted to that. When I came back, I started doing other businesses, and I've kind of parked all of that because this is the most exciting thing that I've ever done, having an impact on other people and getting them to grab hold of life and say what's really important to you and your family.
I love that. Caspar, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. That was incredible.
Thank you.
Really incredible.
Thank you.
All right, guys, the shared narrative notion, I really hope that you grabbed a hold of that, because the reality is this is one of the most extraordinary stories I have ever come across in my life about what to do when you hit that patch and realize that your life has not turned out the way that you want it to. That is a narrative that I think virtually everyone I have ever spoken to has come to that conclusion. Whether they're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Everybody hits that point where they feel that way. But most people don't do anything, or even if they dream, it's the one-day scenario. One day, it's always off in the future. But his story is not the story of somebody that had the money to throw at a problem. It's somebody who had a problem, and he was so desperate to solve it that he was willing to look at any radical answer, to find anybody that was being successful in that way, to sit at their feet, to be humbled, to learn, to grow, and to change everything about the way that he was approaching life so that he could get that. And I cannot tell you, look into my soul right now. The fact that he and his wife said, continuing to fight just doesn't make sense. So let's stop and share a dream. That's extraordinary. Building that dream, having that narrative, taking the time to obsess over it, and how beautiful it becomes and how exciting it is to drive towards it, to have that relentless action, to keep pushing yourself towards something that's this shared vision. It is like the most beautiful, textbook example of how to rejoin with somebody, to meet them on a beautiful place, a place of commonality instead of difference, even when there's only small commonalities. But to find them, to put your finger on them, to talk about them, to appreciate each other, to celebrate each other, to give candy bars and stickers, all of it. It's so crazy. If you're really listening to this story, it is so powerful. Whether you want to put it in your life, whether you want to put it into your business, it's all the same. He explains it so well. Read his book. It is beautiful and effective. And if you use the techniques, it will change your life if you let it. All right, guys. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Caspar, my friend, that was incredible. What is up, Impactivists? I hope you really enjoyed that episode and that it helps you on your journey. I know on my path to develop into the person I wanted to be, having a mission in my life became one of the most important things. And mine is to acquire as many skills that have utility as possible and put that utility to the test in service of something bigger than myself. You guys have heard me say it 1,000 times, but the question is, how do you do that? And our friends at Skillshare know exactly how to pull that off. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes with the best teachers in film, production, writing, Google Analytics, marketing, leadership, and a whole lot more. Now I get it, courses can be expensive, at least until now, and Skillshare is generally cheap anyway, but now for the first 500 people who sign up using the link below in the description, you're going to get 2 months of Skillshare completely free. That's not me making a mistake or a typo, it's F-R-E-E free. So go get set up. Getting set up, in fact, is going to take you less than a minute. And if you're a psycho like me about efficiency, that's actually going to be part of your decision. For months at Impact Theory, we've been grinding hard to create a comic book with Steve Aoki called Neon Future. And to help us execute that work, we used a project management tool called Trello. And the way that we figured it out was by using one of Skillshare's 35 plus courses just on Trello. You can learn anything you want with Skillshare. So whatever your future project is, or even just something personal, you can check it out, pick a skill, learn something completely new, and you don't have to worry about getting charged. If for any reason you aren't completely in love, cancel it in the first 60 days and there is zero cost to you. All right, guys, use the link below and be legendary.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching and being a part of this community. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. You're going to get weekly videos on building a growth mindset, cultivating grit, and unlocking your full potential.